Hello Mastermind Gaming community, and in today's video I will be going over the basics of the real-time strategy game Age of Mythology. After visiting some online forums, I saw requests for an introduction style video to Age of Mythology, and one that is a little more recent than others. I'm going to be doing my best to explain the basics and core concepts of Age of Mythology in a way that hopefully will be easy to understand and grasp the aspects of this game. If you have any further questions that aren't covered in this video, feel free to let me know down below and I'd be more than happy to help and answer them to the best of my ability. I would like to note that I am not a super competitive player, but just someone who enjoys playing RTS games in a casual sense. So while I won't be the most optimized player out there, I understand the concepts enough to hopefully transfer some of that knowledge to you. And without further ado, let's get into part 3. In part 3, we will be going into a little more detail about the basics and the differences of each mythos in Age of Mythology, along with talking about a few more advanced features that are good to know about, such as rally points, hotkeys, and more that can help you become a better player in Age of Mythology. In this section of the guide, we will be discussing the very raw basics of each mythos civilization in Age of Mythology, along with some core differences that each of them have. This is not going to go in depth into each one, as there will be separate guides for each one in the future, but just a brief overview for you to understand some of the concepts of each civilization and might help newer players decide on which one might fit best for them. The Greeks. The Greeks will be the easiest to understand for many new players, especially those new to RTS games. Your gathering camps are static and can't be moved once built, and you even get a scout cavalry unit. Greeks' favor gain is easily controlled by sending villagers to pray at a temple. If you need more favor, send more villagers to pray, and if you find yourself not able to use your favor fast enough, take them away and move them to a different resource. Greek units are some of the strongest in the game, but are also more expensive. This makes it even more important to never let them die unnecessarily. Also keep in mind that while the basic Norse and Atlantean units are built from one structure, the Greeks need 3 different structures to train units from. But this can also make it easier to understand where each one comes from for new players. Just remember to think ahead if you're going to need to change units quickly. In general, Greeks use a good balance of all 3 resources, but often lean towards being a pretty heavy wood civilization early in the game, so early raids that happen on wood gathering villagers can often be troublesome for many Greek players. Think of the Greeks as the all-rounder group, one that can fit many playstyles and can be a great starter civilization for many players. The Egyptians. Egyptian units are very cheap and also much weaker than Norse and Greek ones. Their resource gathering is 10% slower than the Norse and Greeks, but you can also offset the resource gathering penalty by using the Pharaoh to empower a resource drop point, which gives a 20% boost to that building's villager production. Egyptian buildings are a little different than the Norse and Greeks. Houses, drop points, armories, and markets are all free to build, meaning that they are all cost 0 resources to build, but they do take a much longer time to build compared to other civilizations, so think ahead and compensate for this. Their other buildings, including farms, cost gold. Overall, you will find that you will not be spending as many resources on buildings such as the Greeks and Norse and other players until you start using those expensive farms. What this means is that you can put less villagers on wood and more on gold and food. Less on wood because you will only need it to build the ranged units for the Egyptians, and more on food because most units will cost food and gold. Egyptian villagers are no cheaper than the other cultures, yet they do gather slower like I said before, so it's often an idea to build just a few more villagers than you would typically with another culture. In general, Egyptians will see a huge need for lots of gold mines, as many of their buildings will only cost gold to build, with food second and wood being the third in importance. If the enemy happens to secure many of the gold mines around you early on, it can be very hard to continue to advance your economy, so keeping an eye on gold mines around you is very important for the Egyptians. Egyptians can be fun for players who like to focus on an economy, like to build larger kingdoms due to the fact that many of their buildings do not cost anything to build. The Norse are unique because their military units build their structures. In this way, it's easy for the Norse to quickly establish forward bases and play aggressively. The Norse approach to gameplay in Age of Mythology is probably the most diverse and can also be one of the hardest to master. Because your military makes your buildings, it makes you for easier offensive building without sacrificing your economy, because a villager building is not gathering resources. But be careful, because you will often find yourself struggling with population caps early on if you're not careful with managing your military and your villager building routes. A unique gathering unit to the Norse are the dwarves, which are essentially villagers who cost gold to build, but they do mine gold 20% faster than normal gatherers. Dwarves are great because they do not take food to make, instead only taking gold. If you're struggling with getting food early on, you have the unique option to build civilians with only gold to continue growing your economy. While it's generally not recommended to use dwarves on food or wood, it certainly is an option if you're in a crunch and food is hard to come by, which is a good advantage to remember if you are playing as the Norse. Norse buildings are often weaker, but cheaper to build. Their weak buildings, together with their ability to construct buildings with their infantry, leads to a very swift playstyle. Rushes and raids are very popular with Norse players, and even though you don't have to rush to win, I would recommend an aggressive playstyle with lots of units, as Norse cannot depend on their weak buildings to keep the enemy at bay like other civilizations can. Finally, the Norse gain favor by fighting. It's pretty much free favor as long as you're fighting. If you ever need a few points more favor to get that tech or myth unit, just try killing some animals with your villagers. The Norse often rely on good amounts of all resources, depending on your playstyle and the units you want to build. However, early on they do heavily need food to build Ulfsarks and Gatherers to continue their economy to get buildings up faster. The Norse are great for players who want to learn how to fight and get rewarded for doing so. This is a civilization that wants to be at war constantly and wants to be attacking at all times. The Atlanteans. The Atlanteans have a unique villager system in which they do not need any sort of resource drop-off points. They just auto-collect and deposit any gathered resources directly to your overall resource count. They are also more efficient than any other citizen unit in the game, which means they gather resources faster than any other single gatherer unit in the game, but you can't build as many of them. You will often max out your villager count in the classical and heroic age with the Atlanteans. They also cost more to make and are the only civilian unit in the game to take both food and wood to create. Losing a single Atlantean villager, especially early on, has much more of an impact on your economy than any other civilization. This makes them highly targeted by players when attacking Atlantean settlements, especially early on. They have some of the strongest walls and defensive options in the game, along with their unique favor generation, which is based on possession of settlements. So the more town centers you have, the faster you will gain favor as well, and it is completely passive. Atlanteans also have a unique hero system in that any regular unit can be transformed into a hero unit for a resource cost, but allows them to quickly adapt to attacking any myth units as needed. You will find that the Atlanteans often rely on food and wood, especially at the start, as to create villagers you need both. They often switch to wood and gold as the match progresses, but this can vary widely depending on who you are playing against and what troops you need to build. The Atlanteans are for players who like to focus on learning how to counter other units, as they have an entire military building dedicated to countering units and can be a great balance between an economic civilization and one that can fight as well. The Chinese. The Chinese are very civilian dependent, and often win by mass numbers rather than overall power of units. Most Chinese units are generally weaker than most other civilization units in the game, but they are very cheap and they produce very quickly. By the time you take an army of Chinese out if they are attacking your base, they will often meet you halfway again with another full-sized army. This makes them excellent for stalling you from attacking them and can also mean they are able to raid your village much more often if you let them take off. They have a unique economy building called a garden that allows them to generate infinite gold, food, wood, or favor depending on what they want to focus on. This means that aside from the Greeks with the plenty vault god power in the Mythic Age, the Chinese are the only civilization that has the ability to generate infinite wood resources in the game, giving them a unique advantage on maps with low wood. The Chinese are great for players who like to build lots of units, as their units are often cheap and can train very quickly. In the last section for this video, we will be discussing what some would consider to be an advanced feature. However, I think it's important for all players to know about and work on using when they begin to feel comfortable with the game and know that these options exist for them to use. The very first quote-unquote advanced feature you will want to look at in Age of Mythology are rally points. A rally point is essentially a gathering point for any unit you build in a certain building. So instead of them standing right beside the building that they are created out of, they will go to the selected rally point and gather there instead. Rally points are extremely important because they allow you to gather units in a certain spot or a certain resource. You are able to click on your town center and then right click on a gold mine, for example, and all villagers who come out of that town center will then go straight to that gold mine and begin mining without your needing your direction to do so. This allows you to constantly be building villagers that will be working right away. So if you are fighting the enemy, they won't be standing around beside the town center doing nothing while you are away from your base. Even a villager standing for 1 minute can mean around 100 or more resources lost during that time, so it's important that they stay busy as soon as they are built. By setting a rally point, you are able to ensure that that won't happen if your attention is pulled away from your base. This is also a popular tool to use when sieging an enemy base. By selecting all your military buildings, you are able to set a rally point at the enemy base, and when you build units, they will run straight to the enemy base without needing your attention when they are built. When you hear people talk about hotkeys, what they are talking about are keyboard shortcuts that allow you to quickly jump to, build, or select groups of units or buildings that you control. I'm not going to go into great detail about them all at this point, but just want to touch on a few that beginning players can start to use and get used to. For example, an important hotkey to know about is pressing the period button on a keyboard will instantly jump to any idle villager, which can be seen by an idle villager banner appearing in the top right corner of your screen. Another thing you can do is to hold down shift and left click that banner to select all idle villagers currently not doing anything. This can be a great way to get them all back to work on a resource. You can press the comma button on a keyboard for selecting idle military units as well, and the same goes for holding down shift and left clicking on the banner in the top right when you have idle military units that might run off from a battle chasing villagers or other units. There are many more hotkeys in the game, however, and you can learn them as time goes on. I just wanted to give you a basic overview of hotkeys and rally points so you know they exist and how they can be very beneficial for you to optimize your gameplay when you start to play more matches. This is going to conclude the general basics of Age of Mythology and what you need to know to help you become a better player and learn the things you need to improve. In the upcoming next videos, we will be taking deeper dives into looking into each specific Pantheon to learn more about the details of each one, how they play differently, and how you can learn to play them, along with a few other tips and tricks about playing that game as well. If you guys like this series, have questions, or want to know more about a specific topic in depth, please let me know in the comment section down below, and I'd be more than happy to answer any questions you have. Don't forget to subscribe and hit the bell icon so you won't miss out on any future content, and I will see you guys in the next one.